Thank you. And it's great. We have East and West. We have George, we have Mark, and we have everyone in between. So I think it'll lead to quite an interesting conversation and a comparative analysis of what different schools and different jurisdictions are doing. Mick, can I start with you and ask you how far GEMS had gone in their digital transformation prior to the current COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, I think there's, prior to COVID, I mean, we've been looking at our digital transformation piece for a good 7 to 8 years. And it's grown with us. It's grown as we've grown our number of schools, but it's also thrown up a number of challenges because we're not a single curriculum. We operate across 4 and even 5 curricula in certain areas. So we've been able to, I suppose, look at what should our ecosystem look like, both from an infrastructure perspective and also from a teacher capability perspective. So GEMS over the years have invested a lot of money. Someone said it was close to $500 million over the last 8 years, which is a huge amount of investment. We're now in a position where we have our own suite of products and our own sort of walled garden for all of our GEMS schools called Phoenix. We've also now curated our own version of an app store just to make sure that whatever is coming into our schools is actually high quality. So from the infrastructure side, there's a lot of time, money and investment gone into that. More importantly though, it's actually now about teacher capability and capacity to actually make all of that work and, and getting all of those things in the right order. So again, we've looked at tagging our digital transformation plan to teacher growth, teacher capacity within those fields. I mean, we have a great partnership with Microsoft, who've opened their doors to us in terms of training. And I suppose across our network now, whilst we've got access to all of that, we've got just over 5,000 of our teachers who are Microsoft innovative educators or innovative expert educators. So we've been trying to, I suppose, boost their skills alongside curate the right types of technology to get us to the point where we have. And that would mean then when COVID happened and the announcements happened, we could switch over fairly rapidly and fairly easily and smoothly.
Thank you, Mick. That's really interesting. Mark, can I ask you the same question, probably from a different perspective as a single site operator rather than a chain like GEMS? How was your school before COVID-19 and their position on tech?
So I think we've been in quite a strong position. I only recently joined the school, but it's based around Google Classroom. That had been quite well established at both the senior and the prep schools. So that was the basis for our home learning platform going forward. We were quite fortunate going into COVID because we'd actually had a week when we'd been closed in November because of the Hong Kong protests. And that had focused minds in order to try and get the paperwork in place to be able to go to live teaching, which we initially did through Google Meets, but actually moved to Zoom a bit further on into the piece. And we've gradually moved that down in what turned out to be 17 weeks of closure. We actually rolled that down to younger age groups and restructured our curriculum accordingly. So I think we had the building blocks in place to do it. We hadn't quite got as far as I'd like to have done, and certainly the guys at Jess, I know, were in a very strong position because everyone was on Surfaces. In secondary, they were running in OneNote Classroom, and it was very easy to flex to home learning for them. And likewise in the prep, they were on iPads and had got app-based learning, so they had a greater variety of options available to them, and that's certainly something we're looking at here. We've just rolled out iPads here to our year 4s, and we're going to build it up through our Key Stage 2 as we did previously at Jess, and that gives a much greater variety to the options to teachers in terms of home learning, in terms of what they can actually get students to do.
Thanks, Mark. George, can I ask you what technologies are available for effective online K-12 education, given your knowledge of the market?
Thank you. Well, I think it's been an interesting time. I would say for a lot of schools, wherever they may be. I think a lot of it has been what I would call patchwork. No one was really prepared for this, and obviously Michael, Mark, and probably even Cody with the business he's in were probably better prepared than many organizations. People I've talked to in the Middle East and even in the US here, you know, they're just trying to get through the school year, and it's finishing up soon. I think a lot of people think that distance learning is PDFs and Zoom and PowerPoints. That's maybe gotten people through this academic year, but a lot of uncertainty going to start in the fall, which we'll probably be talking about in a little while. I think a lot of the there's a lot of platforms out there that people have looked at. There have been companies that have, I know, tried to be supportive and offering free resources, which I think is good. I do know a lot of schools, in some ways, unless they know the companies, are kind of tired of hearing from companies promoting their products. It's been better if they're not promoting, but offering resources or support, particularly if they're already working with a school. And I think there've been a lot of issues around supporting special needs. I think that's been a difficult area with this distance learning, which is going to, I think, require a lot of work. And I think one of the things that we discussed, I know last week on one of the webinars, and it applies to K-12, is I think the whole issue around professional development. I think a lot of the teachers, no fault of their own, this is, you know, they've just tried to get through. I think there's going to have to be a shifting to more professional development resources and training. I know I'm working with a company now that's trying to focus a lot on PD training for primary teachers in learning distance education. So I think there's a lot of, it's going to be interesting to see as we talk here the rest of the hour, looking at kind of, you know, shifting resources and the things available out there, because I think schools realize, and with the uncertainty in the fall, what are they going to do to be able to improve their distance learning activities?
Thanks, George. And Cody, if I can ask you, I mean, you're in a slightly unusual situation in that prior to COVID-19 and post COVID-19, one might argue would make no difference to your particular model. But what's, can you tell us a little bit about it and your experience?
Yeah, I mean, you've said it correctly. I mean, we really have just been business as usual these last you know, several months. We're a full K through 12 full-time online school. So when a parent chooses to enroll with us, you know, they're choosing a lifestyle where they're probably educating it in the home environment. Go ahead. Oh, I guess I would say it this way, that you know, from what I see, it's not a matter of resources, because as George pointed out, there's lots of resources out there. It's you've thrown all these things at teachers now, and then teachers have been, you know, kind of overrun by, how do I make all this work? Because at the end of the day, it's the teacher-student, you know, transaction that's the most important thing. And so they've had to kind of figure it all out. You know, how do I make sure every kid's doing something and doing something productively every day in the various subject matters? And that's a huge challenge for teachers. So it's not resources. It's not really even technology. There's plenty of technology. We're proving that, doing this, Zooms, you know, whatever. There's all kinds of ways to connect. It's making sure that you've put a system together that allows you to productively, you know, teach, and students can productively learn and engage and interact with curriculum and meaningful educational resources.
Thanks, Cody. And Mick, from Jem's point of view, obviously you described, you know, a long history of investing in this area, so you're probably better equipped than some, than most perhaps, but presumably it was an accelerant for further investment, further change, further review and consideration of your technologies.
Yeah, I think so. I think what it made us do is just reflect on the amount of technology that is in place, the types of platforms that we're using, but more importantly, and you know, both George and Cody mentioned this as well, it's actually around what is it we're actually trying to do during this period. You know, what should learning look like, and then use the technology to help support and enable some of those things to move forward. So it's rather than the technology side, wagging the dog. We want to make sure that learning is actually front and centre. But it did mean that even though we've got a diverse ecosystem, we've obviously come back down really to 3 or 4 key products around platforms for live delivery, interactive platforms for small group collaborative, and then other aspects that are asynchronous. And I think what I'd probably want to reflect in here, that whilst we've got a consistency across all of our schools and getting that balance between synchronous learning and asynchronous learning, and making sure that that's actually correct, not all schools are equal. Either they've not been able to do that, some have been able to do more in terms of synchronous delivery, others, as George has said, have sort of adopted back to the PDF and Zoom or a PowerPoint that's just played through. And I think that, that's fine if that's what people can do, but it should take us beyond that. We should be looking back to the education coming first, technology being behind it to actually support.
Thank you. And Mark, from your point of view, I've heard stories of schools going out and panic buying surfaces and tablets, and you were seen down in Kowloon trying to buy some things from the back of a lorry for a cheeky discount. But just your experience in Hong Kong and what you guys did. I'm sure you didn't go around like a headless chicken, but there is tales of that, isn't there?
There are, and I think a lot of people have been caught with their trousers down, to be honest, over this whole thing. That they haven't been able to flex to home learning, and that's partly because they haven't invested in the learning systems. Partly they haven't invested in the platforms. Partly that their people at home haven't got the technology to support what they're doing. And I think that the trouble is that you've got to have your pedagogy in place, you've got to have your training in place before you can do anything else. And I think and whilst this has been a really important period for upskilling and sharing best practice between colleagues, I mean broadly the base of the expertise in the community here at Kellett's been really high, and therefore it's been very easy to bring people up to speed and move people on. But if you haven't got that critical mass of expertise within the community, it can be very, very difficult. So I think going forward, people are really going to have to sort of invest in this in terms of more in terms of time and training. I think a lot of schools have got kit, and some of the platforms don't cost anything at all, but they do take time to set up, and they do take time to use effectively. And if this is going to be something we sort of flex to more often, then people are going to have to put in the investment, most notably in terms of time and training.
It was interesting, Mark, like you said in November, I think you said you had time out of school due to typhoon season, or sorry, due to the riots. But you also mentioned, and I know previously, about the typhoon element, and that a bit like snow perhaps in the UK. There are times of the year when the kids are not at school, and the school
we lose days every now and then, whether it's through typhoons coming in, or whether it's through black rain or red rain, as they call it here, which are really intense things. Obviously in Dubai, occasionally you had rain days. In the UK, you get snow days. But I think going forward, I think we perhaps need to sort of not use those as an excuse to have a day off. I think we need to just be able to flick the switch and move to a home learning day. And in fact, one of the things that we've built into next year's calendar is that we're, very early on in the year, we're going to have a home learning day that is timetabled within the first couple of weeks of term, in order to make sure that all the people that are new in our community, whether they're new students, new parents, or new teachers, are all up to speed on how our home learning program works. So we can, spend a few days making sure everyone's got the logins right, know what the procedures are, and then move to that for a home learning day early on. A bit, I suppose the parallel would be like running a fire drill, just making sure everyone is ready to do it. And I think certainly, I mean, in our context, which is quite uncertain, not least because of the weather and the political situation, you know, that actually we just need to be able to flex in that way. And I suspect that will become normal practice around the world. Perhaps hopefully not have to use it as often as we might, but I think it would be a very useful thing for schools to be able to do.
Thank you. George, from your point of view, you know, you're based in the US, most of your business in the Middle East. Interesting to hear your sort of comparative analysis between the two education markets and the type of queries that US schools have and their demands for equipment and tech versus the Middle East and how the two compare in broad terms.
Yeah, well, excuse me. Yeah, it's been interesting. I have a daughter in high school, be a senior, and I guess I would have to say I've been disappointed from the U.S. perspective, and I think it's no different than many other places that everybody was caught off guard. The schools weren't prepared, even though they may have had some of the technology in place. Teachers have really struggled with providing good instruction. Been a lot of complaints from parents and students. Like I said, everybody's just they're finishing up school this week. They're trying to decide what they're going to do in the fall. Are they opening? Are they doing some blended learning? Are they having students come different days? I know all around the world they're all looking at these different scenarios. So I would say it's hasn't been. I mean, there have been maybe some cases where it's been good, but in general, from what I've been listened to or I think they're all trying to find, and I encourage schools that, you know, I know in the past they've had to buy 10, 15 systems to accomplish everything in the school. And, you know, we have all these silos that don't connect. And now there's more companies that I think have reduced that, where schools can not have to have as many different systems in place. That'll make it simpler for teachers and make it easier for administrators. I think that's something they need to look at and evaluate, not make the first decision on a product. And I think even though not so much in our public schools, obviously, but even the private schools here, and just like I think what I've been hearing in the Middle East, particularly UAE, they're going to be having a lot of uncertainty. What is the enrollment going to be in the fall? You know, you're hearing about a lot of schools, parents not coming back, job cuts, layoffs. I mean, that's affecting us here in the US, about affording to go to college, having to make other decisions. But just looking at the K-12 schools with enrollments down, that's going to affect purchasing decisions, shifting budgets. And a lot of people won't know what their numbers are until maybe August. And I know many schools I've seen through some people I've talked to in articles that, you know, they're looking already, they've been offering discounts to encourage people to stay at their school, new students. So I think, and then I think one of the things, and maybe Cody or Michael or maybe even Mark have some feedback on this. The UAE, as far as I know, was the only country back in, I think it was April, that announced that the Ministry of Education and KHDA and all of them were going to evaluate all the schools, their distance learning. They were going to do a 5-hour online evaluation. I don't know what the results are. I understood they were going to be published when they finished them, but I haven't seen them yet. So I have a feeling that my reaction would have been that I'm sure they found a lot of issues with this. It shouldn't be any surprise. But I think there'll be some interesting feedback from all that when you look at all the schools over there.
Thanks, George. Maybe to bring in Cody on that point.
Yeah. We went through that process with the KHDA about 2 weeks ago now, and you know, it was fairly well thought out. Some good questions. They tried to tap into, you know, all the different aspects, from leadership to teachers to students and even parents, and then actually sat in on some live classes. To be honest, we haven't received any sort of written or even much verbal feedback at all. And it was, I don't think it was intended to be, you know, sort of like the inspection process. although I, sort of had that feeling, but it didn't seem like they were trying to give us a rating or really be too judgmental. I think it was more observational and more data collection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I probably agree with that. I think, I mean, DLEs are still, distance learning evaluations are still happening. I know we've got a couple to finish off for next week, but I think it's been a great opportunity. And whilst I agree, George, there's going to be significant variance across schools within the UAE, but I think it's a real opportunity for the regulators to actually have a good look at what does work and actually how this could influence things for the future as well. So, I think, Cody, you're absolutely right. It's more about observational rather than judgmental, even though there will be a judgment made at some point, and I think they will publish eventually. We've seen a few that have come out of Abu Dhabi so far. But I just think it's one of those things that says, actually, I know it's an awful phrase, we're all in this together, but we are. And I think the regulator is taking a very positive and proactive stance here to actually learn, in depth and detail around what's actually happening and what could happen should we not be in a position to return fully, or in a partial return, or even we can open fully, but we still want to continue with elements of blend and open those possibilities up for parents as well.
Thanks, Mike. Cody, can I touch on a point that George made about, and I'll ask all the panelists about this, about different siloed systems. Maybe one system's not talking to the other. You're training up staff on half a dozen different things.
Yeah.
Different language, really. What approach have iAcademy taken on that front?
Yeah. Well, we have a single sign-on for not only teachers but students and parents. So it's a very seamless system. We have a platform that's been developed and developed for iAcademy Middle East, and it's from our parent company, Pansophic Learning. It's called Excel Management Platform for Education. And what it has is it's got a student information management system. It's got a content management system, and so those things all work together. And training teachers is really, you're just training them on how to not only get onto the system, but then also how to access resources. And from there, lesson plans are already developed for our teachers, so they don't have to go through that whole process. But what they can do is they have the ability to add to the system. And so that's why I say, an educational experience, through iAcademy Middle East is going to, for a child, is going to be pretty seamless. I mean, they get on, everything's kind of in front of them. They do their work. Teachers teach the lessons that the students are working on, and give feedback in real time, give feedback online. So that it's a very, very seamless system.
Thank you. And Mike, the same question to you. I take it from one of your earlier answer that you have an ecosystem in GEMS. It'd be interesting to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I suppose we stitch together multiple systems. So again, like Cody, it's a single sign-on. The domains talk to each other with no problem in terms of that. Some clever spaghetti that sits at the back of our systems that just helps make that. But it does mean then that we can actually bring together, if we're using Google Meet, or if we're using Zoom, or if we're using Teams, everything still works seamlessly. And that, I think, has been really good for us. I think one of the things that we learned, and maybe it's a good thing for us to insist on, is that we said that when we moved to this remote learning period, that we wouldn't introduce any new technology. So we'd have teachers, students, parents using familiar technology, things that they use every single day. And that, I think, took a lot of headache out of, the switch over to remote and what it would be. We did have some issues with things like Zoom, etc., and I think everyone across the world suffered with Zoom bombing every now and again. We took a decision then not to use that, and then we moved everyone else across to Teams and then trained them up in that. But again, I think because of the setup that we have, it became seamless. It wasn't a big sort of transformational move for so many schools to move from this platform to that platform. All of their other programs and apps worked as they would normally do, and so it was only the live aspects that we're trying to deliver that we ended up changing and just dropping Zoom and moving to teams. So yeah, so I think, you know, that comes down to, again, the type of infrastructure that's put in place. It's also then about saying to people, look, there might be lots and lots of products that everyone is offering out there, and it could be like the veritable sweet shop where everyone says, I want this and I want that and I want the other. Stick with what you've got, yeah, and make that work effectively, because that's what you're using every single day when you're back in school anyway.
Thanks. I think that's a really interesting point about not taking on anything new, sticking to the existing technologies that you were familiar with. It's really interesting. Mark, coming to you on the same point, in Kellett, is it an integrated system, or is it, are there silos, or what's the position?
Yeah, we're in the process of integrating them all together with a single sign-on, so we haven't quite got to that point yet. But it's been, we've certainly stuck to our existing systems. I think one of the interesting things that we did was that we realized that the pedagogy for home learning was actually fundamentally different to the pedagogy for normally in the normal classroom. And although we initially set out doing sort of all of our lessons live in the secondary school, in the senior school, through Zoom, we actually stepped back from that on the back of a questionnaire, well-being questionnaire to the students, because the whole community, whether it was the parents, whether it was the students, or whether it was our teachers, were really struggling doing Zoom from sort of 8:30 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon. So we reorganized our timetable. We went for shorter lessons, moved them all into the morning, and consolidated our teaching into the morning. And we did the same thing in our primary school. So we didn't do any live teaching at all after 12 o'clock. And that enabled the community, and we moved all the sort of PE games, sort of pastoral stuff into the afternoons. And that worked really well, because it meant that families could, for example, take exercise together, and it meant that also you could get a break away from screen time, so you could do non-screen based work during the afternoons. It wasn't that we weren't setting work, it was just that I think just sitting staring and getting zooming in and out was probably a bit too much. So I think we're all finding our way in terms of what the future of home learning is. I think it's very interesting where this will take blended learning programs anyway. And I think there will be some real lessons around how organizations that do blended learning, or indeed as the iAcademy do, sort of a complete sort of combination of online and blended sort of stuff, without face-to-face. And I think that bricks and mortar stuff, and I think that's going to be interesting, that when we eventually have the emotional and physical capacity to actually distill this, I think we'll end up with very, very different look to how things work.
Thank you. And Cody, coming to look into the future side of things, has iAcademy learned a lot of lessons in the last 3 months? I mean, you're slightly unusual in that, as we said earlier, it's kind of your business model. But do you see, are you charting a course forward that takes into consideration your experience?
Yeah, so I think what we're learning is a little bit, we've come to appreciate more the brick and mortar schools and the difficulties that they've been going through, and so we've been able to work with Pansophic Learning, our parent company, to begin to have some discussions with schools and school groups around how they can implement a similar system to what we have, and do that so that they can create more of a fully blended model structure. And I would say that we're pretty deep into some discussions with some school groups and some schools here that are looking to reimagine themselves into fully blended model schools. And right now, from an economic standpoint, I think it's going to be critical that some schools do that just to survive. the numbers are dropping, and George, the things you're hearing, I think are actually true. And not really knowing how it's going to shake out in September, some of these schools are preparing such that, maybe we're not going to be, regardless of what the regulations are, maybe we're not going to be in school 5 days a week, because from a cost perspective, we're going to shut our school off for 2 days a week. But yet at the same time, we'll still, just the physical plant, not the schooling. And so it's working that true blended model system. So that's what we're learning. Those are the kinds of discussions that we're in with school groups.
And make the same question for you. I mean, the amount of data that Mark alluded to, the amount of data that's been collected in this, the greatest social experiment of all time, it's mind-boggling. And I'm sure you guys have the quants and the brains to analyze it and chart the course forward. But just your view on the future of learning and
Yeah, and we touched on this in sort of last week's webinar as well. I think this presents a brilliant opportunity for us to re-examine what education should be about and the purpose of schooling. And then, Mark touched on this earlier as well, around, what's moving things around, focusing things in the morning, pastoral work in the afternoon, and maybe we should be just re-examining the whole nature of a school. For us, we're looking at moving towards blended models. We've got some quite detailed plans that we're beginning to put in place and just flesh out. All of our schools are quite different in terms of their context, so we need to allow them that flexibility and that space to do it. But also, if you look at what data tells us around what education should be, and how students are learning, etc., we know that things should become more hyper-personalized for students. And I know it's a buzz phrase, but actually this gives us an opportunity to begin to embrace some of that. So me as a learner, what do I actually want to do? When do I want to do it? How do I do it? Where do I do it? It allows for that type of discussion now to actually take place. So within our schools, we're posing those questions back to all of our principals and the leadership teams, getting them to genuinely debate what can be blended, what can be offered in a different way. And to Cody's point, we know that enrollment numbers are going to be pretty difficult for all of us in September. There may be people who are still here but who don't want to physically come into school, or there may be people who've gone home but still want to connect. So we're also looking at how can we actually create that online connection for those either in Dubai or also those who are actually in different countries as well. So a number of different things. What we are very clear on now is that we're not returning to what we had before. We've got to begin to push the agenda forward and move things forward. And if, as the largest operator, if we don't do that, I don't think anyone else is. So, we're very happy to share. We're very happy to learn. We have not got all the answers at all. But, someone needs to take a brave step. And so I think I've been pushed to the front of the queue on that one, so get out there and try.
Good man, mate. And Mark, same question to you. Sorry, George.
Ivor, can I comment here?
Please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things I have also found that schools I would encourage to evaluate is some of them have told me that there's certain products or technology that might be old or they're not using as much. And some of them are saying, if we don't need this product anymore, let's not renew it. We can find those same features in a new product. We can shift, maybe it was $20,000, $30,000 to something else. And not just, I would have a complete evaluation of some of your solutions to be sure you're really using them, is one thing. I think maybe you're going to ask this question later, and Cody probably has a good handle on this, and I'm sure Michael is, what are the accredited rate, or one of the issues I think the regulators have to deal with, and we talked about this last week, is being more open, if I can use the phrase, open-minded and accrediting online learning. Particularly in the Middle East, if you will. I know, there's always the issue of quality. And I think one of the interesting things out of much of this, we've also learned, maybe to no surprise, and I've seen it here in the US, how much teachers miss the face-to-face interaction with students. That comment has come up a lot. You know, and hats off to teachers for really caring and missing the students and trying to stay in with them in some way, even not so much worrying about the academics or homework, but just a caring environment. And some of them, you know, checking in with students or having personal time on Zoom, whatever it may be. That I think I've been really touched by some interesting examples of how teachers even have driven by in cars by kids' homes to wave at them, if you will. I don't know if you can do that easily in Dubai, but anyway, I just throw that out there that I think getting away from looking at the human factor of all this.
Thanks, George. I was going to bring you in on but I'll come back to you. Mark, on your views on what you're going to do in your space, looking to the future, and I know you sort of alluded to it's a bit early to draw any conclusions yet, but it'd be interesting to hear your take.
Well, I think if I may, I'll share a more general comment about where I think education will go coming out of this, which is I've worked on a sort of model based on airlines, which from those of us who can remember what it was to go on an aeroplane, which was sort of months ago now, you've got your sort of first class, sort of premium economy sort of model. And I think that's the way education will go. And it's very interesting to see where Mike's taking, the GEMS group around it, because I think these will be different price points. And I think that, there will be effectively a luxury brand, which will be the teacher standing in front of 20, 30 children. And then I think there'll be a blended sort of, premium economy sort of model where you have a combination of bricks and mortar and home learning and, video conference type teaching. And then they'll end up being the wholly online budget model, sort of the Siddhartha Mitra sort of hole in the wall type project, where the whole learning program is totally, there isn't any sort of human interaction, but the learning's there. And I think that model this whole COVID-19 thing has been an accelerator towards that model. I think we're going to get much more, towards that, particularly in outside the sort of really wealthy countries, the sort of, the Europes and so on. I think, here in bits of the Far East and certainly in a lot of the Middle East, I can see this model being picked up. And certainly when you get to somewhere like India, and rolling education out in India and Africa, it's going to, those sort of more blended and online models are going to become much more frequent.
Mark, would that model work for?
I just want to jump in here for a second, because I want to be clear that an online education is not a sort of a watered down version of anything. And I don't know that that's what maybe, Mark, you were referring to, but the premium blend, the premium model that you might be describing there really has to do with, the bells and whistles that a facility has, and you're having to pay lots of rent and things like that. The quality of the education is really what's key. And when you have good teachers, it doesn't matter if they're standing in front of 30 kids or if they're teaching them online. If they're good teachers, they're good teachers. And so I think what we do is we scale at a different level than a brick and mortar school does. And we do that with really, really good teachers. And what we can do is we can leverage, where they live, rather than, having to have them be in a place and having to pay them all the things you have to pay when somebody lives, in Hong Kong or in Dubai or wherever. So we leverage our human resources much differently. And also, when we don't have the expenses of the brick and mortar school, we can do more. So just want to make that.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Cody. I think in terms of content delivery of information, in terms of exam preparation, it can be done through blended and online platforms. But parents will want to pay to see their child on stage in a play, or to take part in sports teams, or do all the other things that in a sense is part of a premium type education. And it's those those, if you like, bells and whistles that will, and that will be the differentiator. I mean, it's, my airplane model, is a pretty good one. There's a sense in which you all get to the same destination. It's just, what you got to play with along the way, and it becomes, part of it. How much, sort of free food, what quality it was, all the rest of it. It's the extracurricular aspects, the add-ons. It's the sort of socialization aspects as well. I think are really important in terms, I mean, one of the things we've struggled with is our youngest children and are missing out on socialization. Taking turns, playing nicely in the sandpit. Sort of queuing up nicely. All these things are things that schools teach, which are a function of bricks and mortar schools, and they're not to do with content delivery. I mean, in fact, content delivery is something we've got through rather quickly online, in a much more efficient way. My teachers have taught the whole year's content, 3 weeks ago, but it's because of all these other aspects that take place in classrooms haven't been taking place.
Mark,
I would also say that socialization takes place not just inside schools, and sometimes parents, I can tell you, frankly, there's a lot of kids that come to our school because of the type of socialization that happens in schools, the bullying and the things like that. I think also there's a lot of socialization that happens outside of school, that kids participate in music programs and sports programs and just general community activities that they would do outside the normal school hours. And so I think there's a lot of that happens as well.
Thank you. Just to take up that theme, Mark, the sort of pastoral approach. We've been reading reports, not necessarily in the Middle East, but internationally, of huge spikes in abuse and issues happening at the home, outside the school, during COVID-19. I'm interested in your take on that and what schools can be doing more, if they can do anything more during this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were particular challenges, that home learning brought about, and and I think we basically had 3 categories, I think, that came out of it. One is there were the children who felt alienated because they were locked away in a bedroom doing home learning the whole time, and particularly when you're in a lockdown situation, that and that was a challenge for some of them. Some of them were in the other end of the scale, where they were actually, you get sort of the idea of cabin fever, and there's just too many people in the house and fighting over kit because they're and the issues around that. But I think one of the lessons that we learned, and there were students, some of our students preferred the home learning experience because that they have anxiety about coming into school, and that was taken away. But I think also the other big lesson is that throughout this, all of the old issues, the normal pastoral issues that we deal with, were actually in the background. People have got family who are dying, people are being diagnosed with cancer, people are ill, whatever, and people are dealing with all those pressures. And then you throw in the sort of COVID-related ones around, sort of financial challenge for the family, and obviously health worries. There's no doubt this has been pastorally a really difficult time, and certainly our priority as a school throughout it was actually not the academic at all. We actually ended up devoting much more time to the pastoral, and took the view that we'd get them all there to the level they needed to, in due course. But the priority was getting everybody through, and I include in everybody, the teachers and the parents, because I mean, trying to manage all of that in the community became the priority, rather than ensuring that we, ticked every box and followed every scheme of work to the letter. You just had to be more flexible.
Thanks, Mark. Maybe I see Mick agreeing. Mick, do you want to say a few words on that topic?
Yeah. I think everything that you read around where schools have returned, etc., well-being has been a focus for absolutely everyone. And Mark's absolutely right that, you know, there are pressures on different people at different times in very, very different ways. And one of the big things I think the schools need to look at on return, whatever return would actually look like, is to actually have that initial focus on social and emotional well-being. And Mark, I totally agree with you that, you know, we should move away from the rigidity of my scheme of work tells me I've got to cover this week and therefore let me get on with it. So actually, let's look at the human side and say, actually, you know, how are we actually now, you know, reintroducing our students back together as groups? You know, some of them won't have seen each other for months and months. Teachers would be the same. Parents would feel the same as well. So I think it should be, you know, incumbent on all of us to actually say that we must put social and emotional, focus on social and emotional first before academic in whatever this sort of return could be.
Thank you, Mike. Just a few questions. I'm conscious of the time. Maybe Mark, one for you. How will schools make use of the massive physical infrastructure that's currently in place? With digital learning, you can charge for ancillary services. So some of the things you spoke about, sports and school trips. So it's likely to reduce the top line of the school. Any views on that one?
Well, I mean, as a school, we've had students back in school for 2-3 weeks now, and you know, we've gradually been able to do things. But we, you know, for example, in sport, we've been able to come back and do some sport, but we can't do all sports. We can't do contact sports. We can't do swimming. So it's going to take time for, you know. Yeah, and we're in one of the best cities in the world in terms of managing this virus. You know, we've only had 4 deaths in the whole time, and you know, 1,100 cases. So it's a very, very well contained thing here, even though we're a big city. And you know, and for us, we're coming out of this very slowly. And for others who have been much worse affected, it will take even longer. So I think people will want to get back to the activities. They'll want to get back to the spending time together, and I think we will come out of this with a view that education really values human contact in schools even more than it did before, because it's been taken away for a while, and we've realised just, you know, what we took for granted, and that's very, very important. In terms of learning, I think we've all probably, you know, we've not got lost learning, but I think we've missed having plays and, you know, all those sorts of activities. You know, I mean, graduations, everything, you know, everything's been muted and played down, and the social aspects of school are things that we really miss, and I think we will want to get back to as soon as possible.
Thank you. Mick, can I ask you this one? Questioner said, would like to know how would a sustainable hybrid learning model look like? If you have any, it's quite an open question, but if you have any ideas on that.
Yeah, how long have we got? A sustainable model. Well, I think this is about chunking up your curriculum and actually looking at what is easier or more applicable to be delivered within an online setting, and therefore what do you then use the rest of your time for around some of those socialization aspects, as people have mentioned. I think that in order to make it sustainable, yeah, we need to examine all of the factors behind that, around price point, around costs, what it could look like, what it should look like. And I don't think either that we're going to end up with one model around a hybrid model. I think there are going to be variations that would exist behind that. But I think that, you know, again, age appropriate. I think back to that personalization point, that people can choose and look at what they want to do, where they want to do it. I suppose our size would give us the opportunity to explore that. The regulator would need to obviously approve that through some things like RAHAL, etc. But we could have a situation where students look at accessing different provision on different sites, accessing things from home and virtually, and accessing other provision for social. So it's not a predefined map, but maybe we're going to have islands of this is where you go to for this type of provision, and therefore a cost associated with that.
Thank you. And if I can ask the panelists, maybe just for one minute each, to sum up your thoughts. George, can I ask you to start?
Only in 1 minute, huh?
Well, we'll give you 2 because you get up so early in the morning.
Oh, it's still dark here. Well, no, I think it gets back to, I think the next few months, you know, is going to be unfortunately kind of a short-term view of trying to combine, understand the uncertainty over enrollment, how that's going to affect financial situation, looking at the priorities of trying to, if, you know, most schools I think are going to be doing some kind of online blended type activity, looking at what kind of resources do we have in professional development, and then looking out more the long term of what do we need to do to really move and leapfrog into new areas that will better prepare us, better deliver content, instruction. I know there's some different companies I've talked to recently looking a lot at different technologies to expedite things like artificial intelligence, which is already out there, but how that can be more supportive with teaching and students. So I think it's going to be a lot of pressure on schools and heads of schools over the next few months, kind of sorting through that with their staff, and then also parallel looking at the long term, where that's going to go, because we are in a new normal, whether it be the Middle East, U.S., out there where Mark is. It's become very quickly a different world.
Thanks, George. Cody?
Yeah, there's a lot that spins through my head. You know, anything from making sure that we don't lose sight of the basic fundamentals of what we're trying to get done with kids. You know, schools have to make sure that there is seamless access to school at all times. That's a challenge that schools are faced with now, and they're trying to solve that as they get into the fall. You know, in the private school industry, you know, there's going to be a fluctuation of enrollments and attendance. We'll have to see how that shakes out. Pricing is going to have to kind of reflect what's being able to be offered. And then, you know, I think in the upper regions, meaning the high school, I think it's going to be important for schools to start looking at how they can make the education, the end game of education, you know, meet more what's happening in the industries.
Thank you. Meg?
Yeah, I think my reflections would be around not being reactive, but schools being proactive around, you know, moving into, as George said, a new normal. Whether it will be normal or not, I don't know. But actually being really clear about the vision for what is it you actually want your children to do, and how do you see learning within this new era. I think being clear about that, and then using the technology to help and support and underpin that, should be, you know, it should drive more sensible decisions rather than reactive decisions to move forward. And I agree that the focus really has to be on professional development and developing more capability, more capacity. I think Mark said right at the outset of the session, this requires a different type of pedagogy. So again, we're not just sort of shoehorning, sticking bits together. This is about a fundamental change. And as with any fundamental change, you need to plan for that. You need time to deliver that. You need time for it to embed. So my advice would be around that. And in terms of, you know, your teachers, teachers are hugely innovative people, hugely creative. Let them run. Yeah, let them do things. Let them trial things. Fine, keep your safety net around you with your ecosystem, etc. But they'll also come up with new ways of doing this. Yeah, and it's not all sages like me who say, yeah, this is how we could do it. You know, we should be listening more then to that teacher voice about how they can actually see the future too.
Thank you, Meg. And Mark?
I think of it as sort of traffic lights. I think we're going to have sort of 3 modes of existence going for the next couple of years, where we have, you know, sort of green is when we're all back to normal, you know, normal school, you know, as we know it. Red is home learning, 100% home learning. But I think there's also going to be this amber setting where we're in a sort of hinterland where we might be doing social distancing. We might be working limited hours. We may not be able to do lunches in school. We may have limited number of students on site. It will vary between school and school. And I think, you know, the schools that will survive and thrive will be the ones who can flip successfully between those settings of sort of red, amber, green, and they do require different skills from the students as learners, from the teachers as you know, in terms of pedagogy, and also in terms of support from home, from parents. So I think that it's about carrying the community through that journey.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to our panel. Really appreciate the conversation today. Apologies to the audience about the tech issues at the outset, but glad we got to discuss other tech issues over the last hour. So thank you, and good day to you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.